Chapter 8: Global Civil Society and the Voices of Change. A civil society is a sphere of institutions, organizations, and individuals located between the family, the state, and the market, in which people associate voluntarily to advance common interests. A global civil society operates on the world stage and goes beyond individual states, markets, or corporations. Civil societies grow through globalization, and at the same time, people who participate in civil societies are globalizers themselves. For an example of a global civil society, let's turn to the topic of violence against women as a global problem. In the summer of 2007, Egyptian leaders mounted a strong public campaign against their country's entrenched tradition of cutting girls' genitals before marriage. Religious figures, government officials, and women activists united to denounce the practice and support an outright ban. The campaign against female genital cutting, also called mutilation, was not merely a spontaneous domestic affair. Cutting had been the focus of an international movement for decades, and the critique had been incorporated in the policies of intergovernmental organizations like the World Health Organization. In this way, Egyptian circumcision opponents joined a global civil society, which reflects a new way of thinking about women's place in world society. Women's movements reach back to at least the mid-1970s, when feminists in many Western countries had already been agitating for greater gender equality. Realizing they had a common cause, various women's groups began to bundle their efforts internationally, resulting in the United Nations declaring 1975 through 85 as the Decade for Women. Through such actions, women's groups raised international interest. Eventually, the argument emerged that women's rights were human rights. This progress was made possible by a transnational campaign, which brings us to the next topic of women mobilizing for change. International women's activism was embodied in transnational feminist networks since the 1970s. After World War II, between 1945 and 1975, about 59 women's international non-governmental organizations were founded, and in the following decade, 80 more joined them. These women's groups comprise an important segment of global civil society because they are an example of voluntary associations formed by people from several countries who work on global causes across and beyond state borders. They also embody key features of global civil society, as they include many loosely linked organizations with different but overlapping agendas and competing leaders, creating segmented networks that are common in other sectors of civil society as well. Globalization has helped them, as globalization has fostered the growth of civil society in general. Now let's examine global civil society more generally in the next topic of the Global Association Revolution. In order to operate effectively, credit cards, like the women's movement, require volunteers working for international organizations. For credit cards, volunteers work for and with the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. Working together in technical committees, engineers, and other experts from many countries regularly gather to set credit card standards. Since ISO has a small staff of less than 200 at its Swiss headquarters, it is volunteers who do much of the work. ISO and its sister organization, the International Electrical Technical Commission, constitute a whole sector of world society because within its spheres of operation, its rules rule. ISO is similar to women's groups because volunteer delegates make it run. It addresses global problems and it flourishes in a dense network of organizations. But if by global civil society we mean associations that develop between market and state, aiming neither to make money nor to achieve state power, ISO exists at its very edge because although ISO is not interested in profit, it does depend on business and has a direct impact on business. And though it is not a government, it has close ties to government agencies. ISO functions as part of the global establishment. ISO and the thousands of organizations focused on technical, scientific, and professional matters that help make world society work are by far the largest segment of global civil society. Another global civil society is the International Committee of the Red Cross, which became the very model of an international non-governmental organization. After Swiss banker Henry Dunant saw the suffering of wounded soldiers after the 1859 Battle of Solferino between French and Austrian forces, he called for the founding of relief societies that might take care of the wounded in future wars. Influential figures joined him to set up a committee that would organize such relief societies internationally. After founding relief societies around the world, the Red Cross became a service provider responding to emergencies outside of war. Over the years, the Red Cross and its Islamic counterpart, the Red Crescent, have become global icons. In 1997, another organization devoted to alleviating the effects of war, the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, ICBL, received the Nobel Peace Prize, but there was a problem in awarding the prize because the ICBL had no address and no bank account, and so the Nobel Committee had no place to send its check. Unlike ISO and the Red Cross, ICBL lacked a definite organization. It instead operated as a more loosely connected network of different groups, roughly in the same manner as the Women's Campaign Against Violence. The Human Rights Watch emerged after hundreds of domestic groups joined forces following a media campaign by the ICBL. On the issue of landmines, civil society advocates and state officials, voluntary associations and intergovernmental organizations became wrapped up in a shared work and a shared way of thinking and became part of the same world community. From ISO to Red Cross to ICBL to women's rights activists, global civil society comprises a wide range of activities carried out by volunteers acting as world citizens. Global civil societies connect people across borders, making their interdependence more tangible. Members of global civil societies think globally, while trying to live up to a set of world cultural principles typically focused on the rights of individuals and the needs of humanity. In all these ways, global civil society embodies globalization. Interpreting Global Civil Society. According to John Keene's formal definition, global civil society consists of a dynamic non-governmental system of interconnected socio-economic institutions that straddle the whole earth and that have complex effects that are felt in its four corners. Strictly speaking, then, for-profit corporations might qualify as members. Keene claims that global civil society is the most complex society in the history of the human species. Since global civil society embodies globalization, other features of world society bolster it. For example, many civil society groups receive state support and work closely with governments, and in fact, global civil society could not survive for more than a few days without the market forces unleashed by turbo-capitalism, which themselves depend on civil society institutions. Civil society is an engine of world society. The size and scope of global civil society has tempted enthusiastic observers to speak of a power shift in world society away from states. The next and final topic asks whether that enthusiasm is justified. Power shift? Very rarely do international non-governmental organizations directly shift power. They typically lack the traditional trappings of power. They possess no tanks or aircraft carriers, and they cannot collect taxes. Their very presence on the global scene makes them a force to be reckoned with, but the actual extent of their power is more difficult to gauge. In conclusion, with global civil societies, we do see some power, but not much shift. My reflection on this chapter is that at first, the title of Global Civil Society was not very interesting, and I had not much of an idea of what it meant. But I'm glad I made this video because I now have a better understanding and appreciation for global civil societies, and I hope you, the viewers, do too. Here at SFSU, I often see students like you and I protesting, volunteering, and or bringing awareness to topics like women's rights by doing things like making t-shirts with statements on them and hanging them in the Cesar Chavez building, or writing things down with chalk all over campus walkways. I see student organizations collecting donations of books, clothes, and money that are sent to people in other countries who are underprivileged or who have just gone through a natural disaster. In this way, I think those students are also members of a global civil society. Earlier today in my information systems course, we had a guest speaker who was talking about cloud computing, which is the practice of using remote servers hosted on the internet to store, manage, and process data. Now I wonder what role things like cloud computing and information technology savviness will play for global civil societies, and whether it's possible that in the near future, the global civil societies and the causes they represent that succeed in gaining supporters and making changes will be the societies that can effectively use information technology to spread their message, regardless of whether their causes are the most just or not. Hopefully, in the near future, the righteous movements will be equipped with the necessary tools and skills to promote justice.